Hello artists and welcome to day 49. I'm DaleneFM and today we're facing another Q&A. A question sent in by Elise Stain. Please explain to us what white to use, when, why and how. So I'm going to talk to you about white while you watch me carry on with the painting of Ronald.
There's no going back.
You can do what you wanna do. You already know. You can do what you wanna do. From head to toe.
The first thing that I'd like to say about white is that there's a heck of a lot of white available out there in the marketplace than what we actually need as artists. The whole idea is to find which white works best for you and for your application. So what I'll do is I'll take you through each different type of white, what it is, what their pigment is, what they're mixed with, and then we'll go through at the end what is the best combination of whites to use. The most popular white on the market is of course titanium white. I'm sure you'll all know titanium white. Titanium white is the thickest, most dense white that is found in the market. It is sometimes considered to be a soft white, but I suppose that would depend on the brand, because in fact it is an incredibly thick, solid white. It's full of pigment. It is therefore the most opaque white. Titanium white also naturally has a relatively warm hue to it. It is slightly on the warm side, but it is very brittle. And this is something I mentioned in one of the videos before. It's quite brittle. So often what will happen if you go and buy a titanium white tube, if you have a look at the pigments at the back, you'll see that there is some zinc white in it. And the reason that zinc white is added is for flexibility, because titanium on its own is incredibly brittle. The addition of zinc white causes the titanium white to be quite neutral, because zinc is itself a little bit cool, and we'll get to zinc in a minute. But zinc white is slightly cool, titanium is slightly warm, so when you put the two together it makes the brightest, most neutral white. Another popular one is flake white number 1. It's a warm white, also like titanium, maybe slightly warmer than titanium, but it is incredibly transparent. It's nowhere near the opacity of titanium white, so it's quite transparent. It's also, because of that, not a very good highlighter. Then of course you get flake white hue. Now if you remember from our previous talk, hue meaning that it is a look-alike. So flake white hue has been made to look like flake white. It is a titanium based formulation, and it's nice for people that have a problem with not wanting to use paints that have got lead in it, because it's a lead free paint. It has got a lower tinting strength than titanium white, so it's nowhere near the strength of titanium white. For clarity's sake, as far as the lead is concerned, I just want to mention that both flake white and cremence white have got lead in them. Flake white hue is formulated to be as per flake white but without the lead, and the other whites are not lead based white. So if you're worried about lead in your paint, just stay away from flake white and cremence white. You don't have to worry with the other whites about the lead content. Zinc white is another very popular one. It is extremely transparent, a very soft white. It's got a lot of flexibility, but because it's transparent, again, it's very difficult to get coverage on it, and it has a low tinting strength. You need to put a lot of white to get a small amount of tinting if you're putting white into a color to tint the color. Transparent white is probably the most transparent of all, but there's something about transparent white that is designed to almost fool us. It's simply the titanium pigment that's just got a lower tinting strength. In other words, it's had a lot more oil added to it. The ratio of pigment to oil is a lot lower on transparent white. That's what gives it its transparency, but all it is titanium white in a low ratio. Cremence white is also a lead white, but it doesn't contain any zinc, which gives it quite a stringy consistency, and because of its stringiness, some artists prefer it. It's very similar to flake white, but it has a stronger tinting strength, so it's got a higher ratio of pigment to oil in it. Then of course you get iridescent white, which has got mica in it, so it gives you a bit of a pearlescent finish. Otherwise it's a pretty neutral white, and it's very effective when you use it as a tinting white, because that pearlescence comes through in the color that you're mixing it with. Now soft mixing white is another one. It's not intended to use on its own. Soft mixing white is also a titanium white, but it's got a very soft consistency. It's got a lot of oil in it, and obviously the ratio of pigment to oil is a lot lower. It has a much lower tinting strength than titanium white, even though it's a titanium based paint. Soft mixing white is usually used by artists for tinting only. Antique white is a very warm white. It's got a very strong warmth. Antique white's not going to be the kind of thing that you're going to want to use for highlighting purposes. Okay, so when to use which white? Now, there's a couple of different ways to look at this. If you're going to use the whites on their own, and strictly speaking, what you would do is on your underpaintings, you would use something like a transparent white or your soft mixing white, because they're softer, they've got a lot lower tinting strength to them, they have very low coverage qualities, so you would use them for underpainting. So if you're going to mix them with a color for tinting, or if you're going to do your brunelle layer and you need a bit of white in there to pick up the highlights, then you would use your transparent or your soft mixing white. So let's talk a little bit about titanium white. Now, as I said before, titanium white is your strongest, most opaque white. It also, certainly in the Winsor & Newton range, it tends to be the most stiff. Winsor & Newton themselves will not claim that titanium white is their stiffest white. They will actually tell you that zinc white is the stiffest white. But as a Winsor & Newton user, I can attest to the fact that titanium white is definitely stiffer than the zinc white. I don't know why they say that. One other thing that I've noticed about titanium white is that the 37mm and the 200mm tube seem to be slightly different consistencies. The 200mm tube is definitely stiffer and thicker than the 37mm tube. I'm not sure why that is. I haven't met anybody else that agrees with me with that. I can't find any information about that, and when I spoke to the gentleman that works at the art store that I go to, he disagreed with me and he said he had never heard that complaint before, and it in fact is not a complaint. I like the fact that the titanium white is stiffer in the 200mm tube. I like the stiff white, so I specifically buy the 200mm tube of titanium white because of its stiffness. I think what we've got to remember with any paint that's nice and stiff and has got a very heavy quantity of pigment in it is that we can always add oil to it to water it down. As I was saying in one of my previous videos, you can always add oil or whatever your medium is to thin it down, but you can't do the opposite and thicken it up. Unless, of course, you're putting a medium, a thickening agent into it, but that's still going to be diluting your pigment content. So it's really nice to start off with a thick white rather than a thinner white, because you can always thin the thick white down. Now, if you're going to just choose to use titanium white and to thin it down, you've got to be a little bit careful with whether or not it's got zinc in it, because if you're going to be using it for underpainting, it's really, really brittle on its own. So if you're going to use it for underpainting, either mix it with the zinc white in addition to what zinc white may already be in it. The other bit of advice that I have, if we're talking specifically about whites that you're going to use to tint other colors with, be sure to consistently use the same white each time for tinting, because you kind of get used to the amount of white that you need to tint a color. And if you change your white, if you change the type of white that you're using, it's going to change the amount of white that you need. So if you're used to tinting with small amounts of titanium white and you change over to soft white, for example, then you're going to need a heck of a lot more soft white to get the same amount of tinting than what you would have had you been using a titanium white. Of course, the opposite is true. If you're used to using a zinc or a soft mixing white to do your tinting, and you one day using titanium white, you're going to end up using too much and over tinting it, because it's got a lot stronger tinting strength. So as far as tinting is concerned, it doesn't matter which white you use, but make sure that every time you tint with the same white, so that you get used to the amount of white that you're going to need. Now, we can simplify whites in a huge amount. There's a lot of whites, like I say, out there on the market that you don't need, because they really are just variations of one another. For example, soft mixing white is a variation of titanium white. It's simply titanium white with a lot less pigment in it, making it softer. So there's no reason why you can't just use titanium white, add more medium to it, and actually soften it down to be a soft mixing white. So you can make your own soft mixing white effectively. It is my very strong opinion that there are actually only two whites that you need. You need a titanium white because it is the most neutral, it is the brightest white, and it's got the most opaque finish, so you can pretty much block out anything. So you need it for highlighting purposes specifically. It's also very good for scumbling because it's nice and opaque. And you need a zinc white. You need a zinc white because it is transparent, so you can use it for underpainting. You can also use it to mix with your titanium. The one problem I have with titanium white is that if you mix a lot of medium into it, it does tend to lose its opacity very quickly. It doesn't take a lot of medium to lose some of your opacity in your titanium white, and then you don't have that very strong opacity that titanium white is known for. So if you want to soften it down and you add more oil to it, you're going to be playing this game between paint that's either too thick but it's opaque enough, or it's the consistency that you want but then it's not got the opacity that you want. So my advice to fix that problem is absolutely use titanium white, but then instead of using pure medium to thin it down with your zinc white. Remember that when you mix zinc white and titanium white together, it's going to be brighter and more neutral, which is a good thing for highlighting. Secondly, your zinc is going to add to the flexibility of the paint, which will make it less likely to crack. So it's going to add to the longevity and the archival qualities of the titanium white. Zinc white is then very transparent, so you can use your zinc white on its own for when you're doing maybe little thin glazes of white, when you're doing thin scumbling, or of course when you're tinting. So in my opinion, there is no need for any other white other than titanium and zinc white. You can use them on their own and you can use them together. If you're using only titanium and zinc white, your zinc white would be for your underpainting. It's very flexible, so it's good to lay down closer to the canvas. It's very difficult to get coverage, so you don't need very much of it when you're doing your earlier layers, so that's a good thing because you don't want a lot of white coverage earlier in your painting. And it's got a very mediocre tinting strength, so just understand if you're going to use it for tinting, you're going to end up using quite a lot of it. The other one is, of course, is your titanium white. Your titanium white will be used for highlights. It will be used in smaller amounts for tinting because it's so strong. It will be used on your later layers of your painting as well, and added with zinc, then it's going to have a lot more flexibility. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't create any white that you want out of titanium and zinc. The only advantage of flake white hue, for example, is that it has got no lead in it, but flake white is not one of my favorite paints. I find it quite blotchy, especially when you thin it down. In my opinion, is nowhere near as nice as zinc white, but there are a lot of artists that swear by flake white and use it, and if you are one of those, then it's going to be something that will be used in a very similar way to zinc white would. The difference between flake white and zinc white is that flake white is very warm. It is as transparent as zinc white, but it's very warm. If you want to create a transparent but warm white, then you would either use flake white because it's warm, or you would just very slightly warm up your zinc white by adding the tiniest amount of cadmium yellow to it. Tiny amounts will give it a slightly warm hue, and it will cancel out the cold hue that zinc white has got. So you don't necessarily need flake white if you want a warm white. You can use zinc white and just very slightly tint it on the warm side. So again, that takes me back to my theory, which is titanium white and zinc white are the only two whites that you need. There's nothing about white that you cannot achieve with those two. Well, artists, that's about all I've got to say about white. The rest of it is going to be practice and playing with your whites to see which ones you like the best. So I'm going to leave you now to carry on watching. There's a few more minutes left of me painting at high speed, and I will see you tomorrow in day 50. In the meantime, wouldn't you mind please liking and sharing this video and get the views up? Thank you so much for joining me. See you tomorrow. Bye.